Okay, so now what we're looking to do is to build our collection selector because we want to reach into our Redux state of our collection items and get the right collection item based off of our match.params.collection ID. So using that ID, we want to be able to get the correct item. Now, the caveat is that when we look at our collections array, the IDs are numbers, whereas our collection ID that we get from our URL parameter is a string. Now, there's two ways we can approach this. The first way is that we modify our items so that the data for ID is a string of the value versus a number. But we're actually going to do that later in the next lesson. In this lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to use what's called a collection ID map. And I'll show you what that looks like. So inside of our shop selectors, we're going to actually declare this const, which is equal to collection ID map, which is just an object that maps the string value to the respective ID, where the string value that we're getting from our URL parameter will be the actual property. So we'll say that hats goes to the ID of 1, which is exactly what's happening here. And then we'll do the same for every other one in the exact order it appears. So sneakers, jackets, women's, men's. So we'll say sneakers goes to 2, jackets goes to 3, women's goes to 4, and men's goes to 5. So what we're doing is we're going to pass in that string and then use that string as the dynamic value of the property to get the correct ID. And then we'll match it in our selector. So let's write that selector. So we're going to say select collection is equal to a function that takes the collection ID. Or we'll say collection URL param. And what this function will return is our create selector call that gets select collections. And then we'll have our collections and we'll say collections.find, which you remember from our .find tutorial. Based on this function we pass it, it's going to run this function on each element from left to right in our array until it finds one where the function returns true. And then it'll give us back the element that returned true based on the function call. So we'll say collection goes to collection.id is equal to our collection ID map using our collection URL param. So nothing too crazy, but some new concepts that we're looking at. Now that we have our selector, let's actually bring this into our component. So not our shop component, but our collection component. We'll need to import connect from React Redux, as well as our new selector. Now, in order for us to do this in our map state to props properly, we have to use the second optional parameter in map state to props. The first parameter we know is the state, which is our overall reducer state from the top, right? The second argument is actually called ownProps, which is the props of the component that we're wrapping in our connect, which is really convenient for this exact purpose. So we'll return an object where the collection will go to our select collection. And what we'll pass it is ownProps.match.params.collection ID. And then because this is returning our create selector call, our create selector call pretty much returns as a function that takes the state and then runs it through this selector flow that we've gotten used to writing. So this is where we'll pass state after we've invoked our select collection. And then we'll pass this into our connect. And now, if we log the collection, we should actually see it, that we're getting the right one. And we see that we do. We get the correct hats object. Right? So let's just walk through this again, because the most complicated steps are the two new concepts that we added. So because we're using an object, and we're using this object because our URL parameter is a string, whereas the ID we want to match is a number. So we write a map, right, which is just an object where the string value goes to the ID. We then map over the collections by selecting it and passing into our new select collection selector the URL parameters, which is a string, and we'll return create selector, which is called a curried function, which is just a function that returns another function. The other function in this case being what create selector returns, which, as we know, is pretty much the shape of this function. It takes the state and then it does a transformation on it so that we get back something else on that state object. And for us, we're passing it through our selector chain so that we get our collections array. And then we call .find on that array where we're matching the correct ID to our collection ID map using our string parameter value that we get from the URL. And then in our collection component, right, we're using the new own props, which is on our map states of props as the second parameter. And that gives us all of the props that we're getting on our collection page component, including our match object that we get from the route component that is passing our collection on our shop page. Because our collection page is mapped to this route. So route, if you remember, passes in the match object, which we will pull the params value getting our collection ID. And then because our select collection is a function that returns a function, we pass the function that comes out of this function the state in order for us to wire everything together. And now we have access to our collection. So there's a lot of stuff that we just went through in order to get our collection object, but now we're able to dynamically change what object we're getting based on what route we're on. So if I were to change this to jackets, you'll see that we get our jackets object instead. Now let's actually style our collection page.